Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. I hope you've all had a great Christmas, whether you were with your families or, like many of us, having to spend it apart. It's certainly been a different one this year. But what better way to put it all behind us than spending next week in midnight clad as we begin Night Lord's Week. But today we discuss, with the death of Roboute Guilliman some 10,000 years ago, just which Primarchs were still left alive, and just who took control of the Imperium. General spoiler warning to begin, as we will be discussing events from across the Warhammer 40k universe, so you have been warned. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. So, the end of the Horus Heresy and move into the scouring years of the Imperium are still very much shrouded in myth, left to a lot of speculation and theories. And while we will be delivered definitive answers when the Scouring series of novels begins, after the end of the Siege of Terror, we aren't quite there yet. So for the question which of Guilliman's brothers were still left alive at the time of his death, we're going to have to use what limited evidence there is, and a fair amount of speculation. So which loyal Primarchs remained at the end of the Horus Heresy? Well, actually most of them, barring obviously Sanguinius and Ferrus Manus. So that left Lion L. Johnson, Rogal Dorn, Corax, Vulcan, Leman Russ, and Jagatai Khan, apart from Guilliman himself obviously. Now I am still of the opinion that the Lion will return to Caliban and disappear fairly quickly after the Heresy's end. Yes, he's a very popular character, and I wouldn't be surprised if he's kept around a little longer once the Scouring series is underway, but for now, it's always made the most sense for this to happen pretty quickly. And it's worth noting it is outright stated by Leman Russ in his Primarch novel The Great Wolf that his brother the Lion was not present on Terra when Dorn and Guilliman were arguing about the Codex. The tidings reach me now, but I do not believe them. He was never at the council when Guilliman and Dorn argued over the shape of the Imperium. So for me that's pretty clear. The Lion was out of the picture fairly quickly. Now for the others, while we have rumours of their ultimate fate, we'll have to do some speculation as to when this may have occurred. But we are given, in my opinion, the biggest hint by Guilliman himself. After Fulgrim had slashed his throat and the poisons were invading his body, we are given a great glimpse into all the thoughts racing through Guilliman's mind in the novel Dark Imperium by Guy Haley. Now of course we are going to be getting an updated version of this, but I'm hoping this is going to remain untouched, as it's one of the best insights into the mind of Guilliman that we have. As the Ultramarines are sacrificing themselves against Fulgrim and the Emperor's children, desperately attempting to retreat with the body of their Primarch, they finally manage to teleport back to the safety of their own vessel. And as Guilliman lay on the teleport pad, we get some very telling lines. Fiery poison sketched out his circulatory system, thrusting the realization of his own mortality upon him. He was going to die. In his final moments, Guilliman began to panic. He did not fear his death, but what it meant for the Imperium. So Guilliman has a distinct fear that he is integral to the Imperium, at least in some manner. And this fear really begins to take hold as he senses the end getting closer. They mourn me already, he realized. I am dead. I cannot die now. Not now. There is too much to do. Too much. Too much. What will Russ do without me? Or the Khan? Too much. So from that thought at least, Russ and the Khan certainly appear to still be among the living Primarchs, or at least Guilliman has not heard of their disappearance. We know word can take a long time to traverse the Imperium at the best of times, but I'm willing to take this on face value and accept that Leman and Jagatai are still leading their chapters at the time of Guilliman's death. So in what sense does Guilliman think of them here? It's obviously not in a reflection of their grief. His relationship with Russ and Jagatai wasn't exactly an outpouring of affection. Evidence with Russ thinking Guilliman was one of the few brothers more boring than Rogal. So Guilliman's not thinking, oh, what will they do without me, in an overly loving manner. Yes, obviously being brothers, there remained the brotherly bond at the deepest core. And dare I say it, even fraternal love. And I think the key is in Guilliman's next thought. Father, he mouthed. Poisoned blood frothed at the gash in his neck. Father, who will guide them now? Who will guide them? The Imperium? His brothers? It's very much open to interpretation, and I think it could very well be both. You could certainly infer here that Guilliman is a little concerned about just what Russ and Jagatai may do without his guidance or input. And it's this line of thought that leads me on to Rogal Dawn. Now Rogal's fate is believed to be last recorded on boarding an enemy vessel. Vastly outnumbered by the enemy fleet, Rogal realised he had to stall the enemy for as long as he could to give the Imperium time to muster its defence. And so he boarded the despoiler-class battleship Sword of Sacrilege. When finally reinforcements arrived to assist their Primarch, all that apparently remained was one hand. A bit on the nose for the Imperial fists. I wouldn't be surprised to see this updated in the Scouring series. But regardless, this was Rogal's fate. And I believe if we take Guilliman's faults in mind, it has to happen before Guilliman's death for one very definitive reason. Not because Guilliman didn't think of Rogal's name, but because simply, I think Guilliman wouldn't have been panicking quite so much if he knew Rogal was still around. Despite the differences that may occur during the Scouring, Guilliman would always know that Rogal would have been a good balance to the personalities of Russ or the Khan. If Rogal Dawn was still around after Guilliman's demise, I believe very strongly that he would have assumed the mantle of Lord Commander. He would have easily been the logical choice, especially after performing the role during the Siege of Terror. And if this had have happened, it would have been much more widely recorded. So the fact that it isn't recorded, combined with Guilliman's panic, we can safely assume, in my opinion, that Rogal was already gone. So what of Vulcan and Corax? Well, Vulcan, as we know, does remain alive, and is found 1,500 years later during the War of the Beast Saga, fighting on a nameless world amid the vastness of the Imperium, defending its people in true selfless Vulcan style. But what of before his disappearance? Well, again, currently we aren't given an exact timeline. We know now at the end of the Heresy, Vulcan will oppose Guilliman's Codex and embark on a crusade chasing Fabius Bile across the stars. And of course the legend still remains of Vulcan only returning after the Salamanders have found all his lost artifacts. But in truth, this doesn't really help us. Legends of all things are more myth than fact. So what of Guilliman's faults in his final moments? Can we take the fact he doesn't think of Vulcan as a sign he was already gone. No, I don't necessarily think so. Yes, Guilliman was fond of Vulcan, absolutely, there is no doubt about that. But that's not the point here. Guilliman is panicking about who is going to take over the running of the Imperium, and just what Russ and Jagatai may do. I don't really see Vulcan factoring into either of those areas, at least in Guilliman's mind. Vulcan simply isn't seen as a Primarch who would perform the role of Lord Commander. The saga of the beast, I hear you cry. Yes, I hear you. But for me, despite scolding the High Lords in his return some 1,500 years later, he simply doesn't stick around to right the ship. Which is exactly what a Rogal Dawn or a Guilliman would have done. That is the quality a Lord Commander needs. And I don't think Vulcan would be overly concerned by what Leman Russ or Jagatai Khan would do. They are obviously completely loyal, so why would Vulcan care? And Guilliman knows that too. So with Vulcan, I really think we're left down to complete speculation. It could be before or it could be after. As at least in my opinion, it could have been before or after Guilliman's death. Either way, Vulcan had no interest in assuming the mantle of Lord Commander. So we can rule him out. He was most likely already gone, and even if he was around, he simply wasn't interested. So last but not least, the Raven Lord Corax. Now again with Corax, we are pretty much left to nothing but speculation. I've always felt Corax departs for the Eye of Terror fairly soon after the events of the Heresy. We have seen during the Heresy series the effect of grief that is most certainly taking its toll in Corax's mind. The Alpha Legion's sabotage most definitely turned Corax down the path of darkness and vengeance. To the point where still to this day, the Raven Lord is still hunting his brothers amid the Eye of Terror. We have always been told that Corax ceded to Guilliman's demands for the Codex and the breaking down of the legions. Then he locked himself away for a year to the day, whereupon he emerged and left for the Eye of Terror. So without anything at this point in time to contradict that, I'm of the opinion Corax is most definitely already gone at the time of Guilliman's demise. So that leaves us, with the possible exception of Vulcan, with only Leman Russ and Jagatai Khan still leading their chapters within the Imperium. So why didn't they take command of the Imperium as Lord Commander? Well, honestly, I believe we'll see all the Primarchs' deaths and disappearances play out in a rather quick succession. And if they are even aware of Guilliman's death before Jagatai gets lost within the webway and Russ departs for the Eye of Terror, remains to be seen. But of all the Primarchs who remained loyal to the Emperor, there simply couldn't be two more less interested in the running of government than these two. They are warriors and generals, neither of which have any interest in governance. And quite honestly, neither of them have little time for warriors who are not of their own. Sure, they may take command when the situation requires it, but they both believe wholeheartedly in their own cultures and way of war. And they are both smart enough to realise it wouldn't work imposed on the wider Imperium. It's actually quite ironic really. The two Primarchs most misunderstood and viewed as barbarians, who both hide unknown intellect beneath and wear their exteriors as a mask, could possibly be the two final Primarchs remaining to defend the people they are so often judged by. If either of them are alive at the time, I believe they would tell the High Lords of Terror It's now time for them to run the Imperium themselves. I'd actually be surprised if either of them even returned to Terra for it. Probably just relying on a communication. With Guilliman gone, it's time for the High Lords of Terra to begin ruling the Imperium themselves. And I'd especially expect that of Russ, because he had a particularly close relationship with Malcador. So while of course it remains to be seen, that is why I believe after Guilliman's death, the rule of the Imperium truly came down to the humanity it was always intended for. Because the two Primarchs left, if even left at all, were the two who simply never wanted the job. But as always guys, what do you think? Which Primarchs do you think were left at the time of Guilliman's death? And what do you think we can infer from Guilliman's final thoughts? Did any of the remaining Primarchs assume the role of Lord Commander, or was it truly time for the High Lords of Terra to take control of their own fate? As always, leave your thoughts in the comments below, I love to read them. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. And if you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.